So, as I mentioned before, I cut off the other jack on here, and we'll use these 4 wires to connect to the clock harness, and that'll give us a little extra length we need. There'll be plenty of length for the factory harness to reach this end, and then the wires come out of both of these will give us enough length between the stereo and the clock. So as you can see, I did a little bit of work with this also. Notice that the pigtail here, which I cut off of a factory harness in a junkyard car, has the speaker wires twisted. I think mine does, in my car does not. So this will probably be the only stretch that actually has that. Technically that might reduce noise somewhere, but since this isn't even a small signal pair, I don't even think there's much of a purpose to it. But I noticed that it does help it be a lot better organized and easy to hook up the pairs. So I figure that's good. I didn't want to leave any loose ends that could short. So what I did was I cut these staggered, and then I have a whole bunch of heat shrink tubing and I capped these off with. So I cut a bunch of lengths of the higher diameter tubing for that stuff and lower diameter tubing for each of these connections. And there's one spare wire here. This would be your antenna wire for the electric antenna. So it goes up and down when you turn the radio on and off in the Acura application. But that doesn't apply to the Civic. So I'm just gonna, I wrap that back on itself and I'll just heat shrink that. Just to help be sure I do this only once, I mapped out all my connections on an index card, so I know what colors go together. I had a little question there I had to revise, but it looks good now. So I have 5 higher diameter pieces in place. Let's see if we can one-shot this with the heat gun. Give you a little time lapse there so I don't have to sit through this tedious stuff. I think that'll be perfectly fine. One thing I noticed that I couldn't even believe, considering this thing was $10 at Walmart, is that these wires are all labeled with exactly what they do. I don't know if you can read that. But for example, that orange one says illumination / dash light. The red one says 12 volt positive. The gray one says front positive, right front. How cool is that? I mentioned before that I cut the loose ends staggered, and generally I like to stagger pairs when I make these connections so that if they did come apart or the connection got exposed, that they wouldn't short directly. But since our friends at the factory were kind enough to strip these already for us and trim these to whatever size, and I paid for that, I'll just leave it be and try to make sure we do a good job with heat shrinking these and soldering them well. You want the piece that you're working on to melt the solder. off the iron, so you know that the piece is hot enough for the solder to melt into it and wet properly. Okay, that's all the speaker pairs. I'll slide the heat shrink into place and shrink those down. So in this case, having the pairs twisted really helped, because I only had to find the positive lead in the top row here and connect that color to the solid color on the other side, and then the other pair just connected. Don't mind me, I'm not a professional photographer. Well, this is the first time using the pocket for anything useful. Got the power connection soldered up. I'll heat shrink those next.